Good afternoon, and welcome to Fridays at 1. Today's the first of our 3 Fridays at 1 events for this semester, and I think it's going to be a very exciting program. As many of you know, Fridays at 1 is sponsored by the Lifelong Peer Learning Program, or LP Square as we call it, at the CUNY Graduate Center. My name is Carolyn Setlow. I'm one of about 300 members of LP Square. I also co-chair the committee that plans our Fridays at 1 programs. I've met some of you before in making these introductions. The CUNY Graduate Center, as again some of you may know, is the postgraduate degree conferring institute within the City University of New York system. Our campus is located in Midtown Manhattan. LP Square is a non-degree program of the Graduate Center, and it's a vibrant learning community of adult learners. Admitted members teach and we learn from each other, in addition to organizing activities and special events like today. If you are interested and like to learn more, and if you're retired or semi-retired, please visit this website, www.lp2nyc.org. That's lp2nyc.org. Just join us and submit your contact information details, and we'll get back to you with more information. We offer Fridays at 1, our speakers program, about 6 times during the academic year. We invite well-known figures in the arts and sciences, public affairs, for conversations with one of our LP Square members, followed by Q&As. These are, I add, public programs open at no cost to the CUNY community and to the general public. The programs are funded by LP Square members' donations to the IER, which stands for the Institute for Education and Retirement. It's the nonprofit arm of LP Square, and this is one of the ways that we as members give back to our community. So now, changing gears, I have the pleasure of passing the virtual mic to Linda Anstendig. Linda is a fellow member of LP Square and also of the Fridays at 1 committee. She's going to have the pleasure of welcoming and interviewing today's guest. I one day went down to Union Square and attended a fabulous off-Broadway production. Thanks to Patrick, he performed all the beauty in the world when it was running off-Broadway. And I now know what a treat we are all in for today. So with that, Linda, you're on.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. It is my great pleasure to introduce Patrick Bringley, the New York Times best-selling author of All the Beauty in the World. If you haven't seen the book or read it, here it is, which is a memoir, as one of my LP Square friends said, a remarkable and unique memoir about his decade working as a security guard at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Named one of the best books of the year by the New York Public Library, Financial Times, the Sunday Times, and others, the book has resonated globally with translations from Brazil, Ukraine, South Korea. In South Korea, it actually was a #1 bestseller too. As one reviewer stated, this book is as rich in moving insights as the Met is in treasures. This summer, Patrick starred in an off-Broadway production of All the Beauty in the World, as you just heard from Carolyn, which was at the Darrell Roth Theater in Union Square. It was a solo play he adapted from his book, so he not only wrote the memoir, but also became a playwright, directed by Dominic Dromgoole, who is formerly the artistic director of the Globe Theater in London. Patrick has been interviewed by many in the media, from the New Yorker, New York Times, most of the national networks, and other outlets, and has also lectured at major cultural institutions worldwide, in not only the Met, but National Gallery of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Dallas Museum, the Emirates Airlines Festival of Literature in Dubai, and the Kyobo Books in Seoul, Korea, South Korea. He lives with his wife and children in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Patrick hasn't left the Met entirely, as he serves as a part-time tour guide, private tour guide there. All the Beauty in the World is his first book, but I, for one, hope it's not his last. And we'll try to find out what's next for Patrick. So we'll talk for about 40 to 50 minutes and then have time for a Q&A. Please put your questions in the Q&A icon on the bottom menu section of the menu bar. And we'll have some time for you to ask your questions. So Patrick, in your book, you reflect on your 10 years at the Met, what it's like to be a guard there, and what it's like to be surrounded by the beauty of art. I'd like to explore both those strands with you, but let's start by talking about your being a guard and how you ended up at the Met. You begin the book by saying, and I quote, "I had no thought of moving forward. My heart is full, my heart is breaking, and I badly want to stand still for a while." So for those of us who haven't yet read your book, and to remind those of us who have, please tell us why being a security guard at the Met made sense for you at that moment in time.
Sure. Well, first, let me thank you very much, Linda, for that kind introduction. And hello, everybody. This is always odd because I just have to trust that you guys are out there. I can't see you at all, but I assume you are. And this sounds like a wonderful program. I have CUNY roots. I work at the Grad Center Library often, just writing there because it's beautiful. I got a master's degree from Hunter. And this is cool. It's cool to be a part of this. So thank you, guys. So to answer your question, so when I was working at the New Yorker magazine right out of college, just in their events office, but I was up in this skyscraper and I kind of felt like I had this, maybe an on-ramp to a career in writing or whatever else, and it seemed very kind of buzzy and important and stuff like that. But while I was there, my brother got sick. My brother Tom, who was 2 years older, got very sick with soft tissue sarcoma. And, all of a sudden, the centrality of feeling like you're in some buzzy office building and that, you're around writers whose names you've heard of, or that you're booking people for the New Yorker Festival who are celebrities, that becomes much less important. And I was spending all this time in my brother's hospital room and in his apartment. And, it was very, very beautiful at the same time as it was very, very painful. And when Tom died, I didn't want to just rush back to some office job and, look down into a computer and sort of hustle along a career. I wanted to kind of remain in that space in a way where I could think about things that were a little bit beautiful, a little bit painful, a little bit high, a little bit wide and deep, and just not the sort of ordinary experience of our rushing around lives. And I love the Met. I've always loved art. I didn't study it formally, but as soon as I showed up to college, I started going to the Met, and I was aware of this job that you could sort of stand in the corner and pace around and have no other kind of central responsibility other than keeping watch in that beautiful place. So I thought that sounded good, and I pursued that job.
At one point, you said it was a job where you got nothing done. And I love the fact that you talked about the stillness of it as well. What was a day in the life of a security guard like for you? Was there a single day, or, was every day different?
Yeah, so yes, I was there 10 years, so I was there 2,000 days. And they were 8 or 12 hours, depending on my shift. And in some ways, they were completely different because I would head into the dispatch office in the morning, which is underneath the Met. where most of the sort of backstage of the Met is. And I'd be in my, you know, dark blue suit, and I'd go to the dispatch office, and they'd look at a big board and they'd say, Bringley, you know, go to Egypt, or go to Rome, or go to modern arts, or go to Islamic arts. And one wonderful thing about the Met is that all those places have such different atmospheres, and you feel different, and the art is different, and the people behave in different ways. And Egyptian art, they're climbing all over things. You know, there's tons of kids' school groups, and in Asian art, it's very dark, so people whisper. And my job every day was to make sure that people who flood into the museum, 7 million people a year, that they behave well around all those works of art. And for the most part, they do behave well. So for the most part, there was a somewhat of a sameness to the day, because you had all this time to think and to watch. But on the other hand, if you get that many people coming into a museum like that, you get all sorts of screwballs and all sorts of interesting situations, and people trying to climb on the statues, like I said, or anything else. So there was always variety that way. And then there was great variety in who I was working with, because even though a job is a rather solitary guard, a guard rather is a rather solitary job, you know, you're brushing up against your colleagues. And there's almost 500 guards that work at the Met, and they're from all over. And I learned so much from them. And a lot of what ended up being my sort of career there was, you know, spent in the company of people, like many of our careers.
Yeah, maybe we can follow up about that. So often, you know, for visitors, the guards are invisible unless we have a question like, where's the closest restroom? But you vividly described the diverse community of guards and the important relationships you developed with many of them. So who are they, and what did you learn? You said you learned a lot from them. Could you share some of what you learned with us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as far as who they are, I mean, I assume almost everyone in this call is a New Yorker, and you know who New Yorkers are. You know, if you just look around in the train, that sort of same cross section of people are guards at the Met, which is cool, because I think that most jobs that you end up having in life doesn't have a great cross section of humanity, because it tends to be that you're in that job because you have the same background as that other person, and you have the same kind of interests, and you've been funneled one way into such and such a career. Whereas, you know, nothing funnels anybody to becoming a museum guard. People fall into it for all different reasons. And especially in a great immigrant city like New York, probably half the guards, more than half the guards, are foreign born, and they've done all sorts of things in their past lives. And they have all different skills and all different kind of mindsets and sort of ways that they think about things. And I quite like that. Like, I get to go around and talk at museums now sometimes, and some other museums, they have like security guards who are the more sort of blue collar people in, you know, the suits with the walkie talkies, and then they have like the gallery hosts who wear polo shirts, and they sort of stand in the galleries and they answer your questions. And I understand why they do that, but I quite like how the Met does it, where the main interface between this great world collection in this great city and then the world that flows into the doors is this other sort of microcosm of the world, which is just more or less random New Yorkers. And these more or less random New Yorkers are the ones answering your questions about, you know, Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer by Rembrandt. Um, and I like that because I think that art is so capacious in what it's about. This art itself is about everything under the sun, and it's about life and death and suffering and the gods and everything else, that it makes sense that all different sorts of people who think in all different kinds of ways should be your guide to that. You know, just like you, the different parts of yourself have to be a guide to these things. And all the curators at the Met, you know, they all went to Princeton and Yale, and they have a sort of particular frame of reference, and that's great. And that they teach valuable things, I'm sure, at Princeton and Yale. but art is so much more than that. It's especially art at a place like the Met that's thousands of years. You can't wrap your mind around it in just by just taking a scholarly frame of reference. So you said what in particular I learned. I mean, I could go on and on, I'm sure. I mean, one thing that I had in my play is one of my best friends at the Met is this guy Vincent. I call him Joseph in my book, but he's from West Africa, from Togo in West Africa. And his favorite gallery in the whole of the Met is the Astor Court, this Chinese scholars garden. And Joseph showed us at his retirement dinner that he is building himself his own Chinese scholars garden in West Africa, in Ghana, where he's retiring. He lives half the year in Ghana and half the year back here in New York. And, seeing these pictures that he's showing us of this Chinese scholars garden with its sort of African hints, that, by the way, is a copy of something that's in New York City, by this, American man from Togo. You just reflecting it, and then you hear his reasons why, and reflecting it through all those prisms, I think is so valuable and so rich.
Yeah, I love that story. One of many aspects of the book that I enjoyed, and you talked about going to the Dispatch Center, was the way you gave us a behind-the-scenes look at the ecosystem of the Met, and so much of what we visitors don't know about or ever get to see. Could you talk a little bit about that, the underground and the many passages?
Yeah, the Met is just so huge, as I'm sure you all know, but it's just even huger than because as big as it is when you wander around on its two main floors, it's just as big below your feet on sort of two additional floors. Most of the backstage of the Met, as I mentioned, is in these downstairs sort of, you can picture it with just concrete and ductwork and piping and rather industrial. But there's all sorts of stuff down there. There's, the conservation studios and storage facilities, and there's a working armory with a forge down there. There's, wood shops and plexiglass shops. A lot of the building that goes on, for the display cases and stuff are done by there. And you see the workmen and you see the custodians and all the locker rooms for all the guards, and just this whole miniature world. Because the Met, 2,000 people work there. So in a way, it's a lot like a university in some sense, that it's this kind of working institution, that part of it is obviously not part of it. Most of it is for the display of these things to you all, the public. But there's also this feeling that all this sort of research is going on there, and all of this sort of preservation of these materials. And yeah, it's cool being behind the scenes that are that way, and you do get to see a little bit about how the sausage is made. I can remember, I didn't put this in the book, but I don't think I did. We have what's called sit down posts. Sometimes, usually we're always standing, but when they're putting together exhibitions, so when you go into a museum, you see those folding doors and you can't go through them. There's one of us guys sitting behind those doors. And I remember when we were installing this Picasso at the Met show, and I was walking through it, and one day I saw one of Picasso's acrobats, and it was already hung by the art handlers, but the curator had written on a Post-it note upside down and just put it on the middle of the thing because the acrobat was upside down. But yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, that's great. And the other part of your job, you talked a lot about people watching, of what you call the sparkle of the scene. And you write about enjoying the endless herd, the jostlers, the murmurers. In fact, you humorously categorized the visitors. You classified them, and I just got a kick out of that. And maybe some of us can recognize our type. Could you enumerate some of those categories?
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. I kind of think that, when you look around, in some ways, the pleasure is finding unusual people, the sort of the oddballs. And, if thousands of people are walking by you in an hour, there's going to be some of those. But it's also fun to find types and sort of understand the patterns of how people tend to behave around these things. I mentioned that, in the Asian galleries, everyone gets quiet because it's very dark. Just noticing that, like that does that to a human being. But yeah, I talked about, there's your classic sightseer who's got, their camera up and is sort of going and trying to find the most famous stuff. What else did I have in there? Then, humorous types like the people who want to know where the Mona Lisa is, or the people who want to know where the dinosaurs are. That's a common one. Uh, they're some poor mother with her small children or something, and they're in New York City, and they come into the big famous museum, and they're ready to see the T-Rexes, and they're like, God, this is an awful lot of Titian in this museum. What's going on here? Um, and then you get people who love art, and you can tell that it's their thing, and you can, sort of lone wolf types who you can just feel that there's something kindled up in them. And sometimes these are the people that come and talk to you, the guards, because they kind of have to say something to somebody. Um, and there are other people. One thing that's so cool about the Met, as I'm sure all of you know, is that even if you're not a big art person, that's not like, particularly your thing, there's something in you something in the Met that's for you, if it's the musical instruments, or if it's the arms and armor, or the baseball cards, and there are all these people who clearly just feel as if they own the Mets because they've been there 100 times and they have their own version of it. And, this is where they, kissed their first girlfriend, and this is where they first learned they got into college, or wherever the heck. And they have their own kind of miniature Met within this museum. And that's one thing I really love about art museums, because, most things, most art, we experience in a linear fashion. If you guys are reading my book, you pick up my book and you begin at the beginning and the end at the end. So in some ways, there's a kind of sameness to people's experience you bring your own thing to it. But a museum is just not at all like that. There's no linear component to it. You run in there, and every single human being is going to walk out with something utterly different than the next human being. And it's fun from a guard's perspective to watch that happen hundreds of thousands of times. And sort of learn how people relate to art and how they relate to that great big place.
Yeah. So you've mentioned some of the surprising questions that you get. Were there any other really strange ones that you can remember, or surprising ones besides the dinosaurs?
Yeah, sometimes people ask for like really particular things. I remember one time I was asked for like Roman medical instruments, and the guard next to me, she's like, "We don't have any." I was like, "All right, I guess not. I guess we don't." I remember I once got asked by a person, I was in the old master wing, and he said, "I need a painting of a mountain that's on fire, like the whole side of the mountain's on fire." And I thought this guy was just a nut, and I was like, "There's no painting like that." And then I was in the 19th century galleries, and I forgot what it's called, but there's a picture of a lava flow in the 19th century galleries, and that's the picture that this guy meant. He just didn't do a great job of articulating it, but also I should have known. I should have known. Um, but yeah, it's funny. It's funny, the like people who ask for the Mona Lisa sort of thing. One funny thing I always observed is that for people who don't know anything about art, and I never faulted people who don't know anything about art. I don't know anything about lots and lots and lots of things. But some of those people who would come into the Met, they would, ask where the Mona Lisa is, and they would assume that the Met is sort of the Art Hall of Fame, and that we have all of the famous stuff, the David and all the famous stuff. It must be here. Um, and then there's another type of person who doesn't know about art, and they think that we don't have anything because they're surprised that anything is real. They're extremely surprised. When you tell them, that they'll see a Rembrandt, it's not behind the glass, and they'll be like, "Well, that's not real." And you're like, "Yeah, it's real." And they'll be like, "No, but there's not even glass." And just in their mind, they think that all of this stuff is, locked up in vaults somewhere. Or I don't know, they've never really thought about it before. and just getting to, I don't know, getting to say no, that thing that you can walk up and breathe on, that was made in Egypt, sat on the banks of the Nile 4,500 years ago, or whatever the case may be, was great fun.
I remember you said something about a visitor who was in the Greek and Roman garden, and he was looking at all the broken arms, broken pieces. And what did he say? He said, did
Yeah.
that break here or something?
Yeah. Yeah, he was looking in particular at this Venus, and she didn't have any head anymore or arms anymore. Oh, well, you try to climb the Venus, so I'd stopped him because she has this very luscious lap to sit in. But he looked at her, and then he looked all around, and of course, everything in the Roman gallery is all broken apart. And he said, "So all this broken stuff, it broke in here?" And I would say, "No, no." But things like that do happen. The Adam statue, the Renaissance Adam statue, came crashing to the ground in 2002, broken a bunch of pieces. A woman tripped into Picasso's The Actor while I was there, not while I was in that gallery, but gashed it in the bottom. The reason we're always bugging you to take your backpacks off is people forget about their backpacks when they're on their back. So they turn and do something like gash the Gubbio Studiola, with all the wooden parquet and that thing. So we are on the lookout for such things.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about you and the art. Favorite part. One reviewer wrote that this is art appreciation at a profound level. So what do you think he meant by that in terms of your own sense of appreciating the art and how you went about communing with it?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I always tried to, I don't know. I mean, I tried to do a number of things, I guess. One wonderful thing about being a guard is you have all this time to respond to art in all different ways. And I think sometimes when you're looking at, a Baroque painting or something, you want to do it the way that a scholar might, and you want to think about the fact that it's Baroque and what does that mean, and why was Rubens a great painter, and you're sort of thinking in art historical terms. But I also really tried, well, what is being communicated by this work of art? If this is a picture of the Holy Family, or it's an adoration, or it's a lamentation, what is this old master communicating? What is this about? And I would get to sort of bear witness to these paintings, almost like the figures in the corner of those old master paintings, who you always see who are watching the central scene of the adoration or of the lamentation. And I would try to put myself sometimes in the mindset of someone in the 14th century who's looking at one of these pictures, when a third of Europe died in the bubonic plague, and thinking to myself, how beautiful, how painful, how strange, how marvelous, how sort of, I don't know, how fraught is the human condition, how both, poignant the drama, and how in some ways this picture that was done hundreds of years ago feels alien to me, but in other ways it's about human beings, and I'm a human being, and what are we doing here? Let me dig into the meat of this thing. So I don't know, I just really tried to I don't know, do what I think that the old masters intended for us to do, or that many of these artists intended for us to do. Because typically the art that we're looking at the Met, it wasn't, a piece of art meant to be hung in an art museum. It was almost a spiritual machine that is there to inspire some level of reflection and meditation, maybe worship in us. And I try to take that seriously.
You particularly talked about how some of those old master paintings really helped you in your healing, from the grief of the loss of your brother. Was it the Fra Angelico crucifixion?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it takes a too big of a stretch of the imagination to understand why people in that era would have been very interested in the Passion, which is, you know, an old word that means suffering, and which they clearly put, you know, very close to the heart of things and the heart of the human drama. And I quite liked being in these rooms with all these paintings that are all the episodes of the Passion and the episodes of, you know, this one life, this man from first century Judea. And they're all these sort of resonant names that have been assigned to all the episodes in his life, and that are just a marvelous way to intellectually, but also emotionally think about some of the kind of core mysteries. And the biggest of those mysteries being the beginning and the end. You know, it's interesting if you read the Gospels, the majority of the Gospels is you know, a grown man who has a ministry, and there's all these parables and sermons and things. And then you go to the Met, and everything is babies and crucifixions. You know, it's the beginning and the end, the beginning and the end, over and over. And clearly, those things were very, very emotionally resonant to them. And I found, I don't know, just sort of great solace in being among those things and kind of being among reflections of things that felt very essential.
Can you
Oh
see
yeah,
that?
so
I'm just
you're
trying to show.
pulling up. Yeah, so this is this little angelical crucifixion. You can see sort of the witnesses that I was mentioning there. One very cool thing about this picture too is that uh, the conservator, Michael Gallagher, was reading my book, and he said, "Oh, you got to come and see this because that picture is on my easel right now. I'm cleaning it." I got to go into the conservation studio and see that Fra Angelico picture when it's naked as the day is what's even the expression there, but with its varnish off and all the past restorations from previous centuries off and it out of its frame, and it's so tender.
Yeah, beautiful. I was sharing. You you know, as you said, you write that when you were describing an interaction you had with some students, I think it was in the Greek and Roman area, that too many visitors think of the Met as a museum of art history. You kind of started to talk about that, where the objective is to learn about the art rather than from it. Tell us what you mean and how that played out with the students.
Yes, I think that that's true. I think that a lot of people's hang up in going to a place like the Met is, you know, they read all those labels, and with those labels, the curators really project this idea often that you're there to learn about this discipline called art history. And art history is a wonderful discipline, but lots of people don't go to the Met to learn about art history. They don't particularly care about art history. They're there to either think about the human condition or the world at large and sort of the strangeness and beauty of it, or to kind of think about beauty itself and to have sort of aesthetic experiences or whatever else. And I always find it a mistake to put too much emphasis on learning about the art, because of course a lot of these artists would find that deeply strange. Because if we're looking at, you know, a mihrab in the Islamic section, they thought of that quite literally as a portal that we're meant to look through in order to worship and in order to sort of understand the unity of the universe and the greatness of God and whatever else. And you can think of it in that grand term, or you can think of it in smaller terms, but just use this art to somehow enrich your life and somehow make you more interested or curious or delighted or whatever the case may be. So yeah, in those particular students, I was just pushing them. They sort of had a rather good assignment where they were supposed to be thinking about whether the Greeks truly believed in their gods. What do you think they literally believed in those gods? And I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting assignment because it makes them think on kind of a few different sort of axes. And I was just trying to get them to really look at this stuff and to say that stone lady right there. Do you think that that's what the Greeks thought beauty looked like? And does it make sense to personify beauty? And does it make sense to feel like we all of a sudden feel this upwelling of beauty in our chest sometimes when we're looking up and, the clouds part and the sun comes out. Does it make sense to view that as being a presence that we can feel? And does it make sense to think of that as Aphrodite? I think that those sorts of questions are things that art can help us think through.
And another painting that you mentioned a few times is Bruegel's The Harvesters. And you talked about stepping into the painting. Could you talk about what you mean? See if
Yeah, well, that's one of, again, that you can view art in all these different ways. Usually when you look at a Peter Bruegel painting, you understand it as a thing made by human hands. And, you're looking at it as sort of this object. But sometimes you think, well, to hell with that. I'm just going to pretend that this thing is quite literally a window. And the Bruegel painting, maybe more than any of the Met, can really trick your eye. And just, if you give yourself time and you sort of soften your eye and you have this level of kind of passivity and patience, you can dissolve into this world that Bruegel presents you there. And it has such a beautiful sort of mellow golds and greens in it, and this hot late summer sky. And it is, you can have this sort of transporting feeling that you have looking at any sort of great vista in reality. Although in some ways an even more profound feeling, I think, because Bruegel has done such wonderful inventive things with his presentation of it, including putting those famous peasants in the foreground who are sort of conked out and having a nap and breaking bread with one another while this huge vista spreads out beyond them. So I think that's what I meant by that. Sometimes give yourself permission with works of art to sort of turn your mind off in the highest and most productive way.
There it is. Everybody see that? Do you see it?
Yes. Oh, yes, I see it. Yeah, there's this there's a great old New Yorker article where Ernest Hemingway's at the Met with Lillian Ross, and he describes this painting as he says he's trying to see it, but the gallery is closed, and he's mad that the gallery is closed. And he says, it's that great Bruegel. Bruegel has painted the grain geometrically in such a way that creates an emotion so strong in me, I cannot take it. And I always love that quote because I just know what he means. If you spend enough time, something about that swoop of the grain back and back, you cannot take it.
One of the chapters I enjoyed, I mean, you talk about so many different works of art. I made a list of some of them, but maybe at the end I can go through that. But I want people to be able to read the book too, so I don't want to spoil their experience. But one of the chapters I really enjoyed greatly was the one where you talk about the two exhibits that especially fired your imagination, the Michelangelo and one that's near and dear to my heart, the Gee's Bend quilt makers. Could you just briefly tell us why you chose to compare those seemingly very different exhibits? What was there about the two of them that was comparable?
Yeah, part of it was just chronology. That it was funny that there was this huge, blockbuster Michelangelo drawings show at the Met, and collected drawings from every institution in the world, and just we were clicking in thousands of people an hour, and it just blowout show. And then immediately after, in a different area of the Met, this much smaller show, I think just 10 or 12 quilts by Gee's Bend artists. So in rural Alabama, these artists, like sharecropper women, in the middle of the century, in the early parts of the century, although it's extended all the way to the present. And of course, they're not sharecropping anymore, but that's where it began. Created these just unbelievable quilts that were made out of old work clothes and any materials they could get their hands on. But a sort of culture developed where all these women were pushing one another to innovate and to sort of do strange and interesting and wonderful things. And it was a very sort of communal shared culture because sometimes they would quilt together, but also they were airing out these quilts, you know, outdoors. You would, when it was the season, you would take out all your quilts. So this little rural Alabama place was like this great big gallery, and they were sort of one-upping each other, but also collaborating with each other. And during the Michelangelo show, I read a Michelangelo biography, and I was reading up on him. And you realize as you read those things, is Michelangelo didn't view himself as Michelangelo, this just big colossus astride, you know, the stallion of art history. He viewed himself as this guy in Florence in a relatively small community of artists who were sort of one-upping themselves and who were just getting things done as best they could. He was constantly frustrated. He was a frustrated man, frustrated by all these setbacks, you know, feeling like he's the worst painter in the world when he has to be up in the mic doing the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and his first experiments with putting on the plaster up there fail and he has to chip it all out. And, you know, and you just, it was easy to compare the two once you sort of know that, you know, all art happens locally in a way. We view it at places like the Met where it's sort of taken out of its context and we just view as if there's this global thing that's called art history. But that's not how it is. You know, this was a guy in Florence or a guy in Rome that was doing these things like a little bit at a time, working day by day by day. In fact, I call that chapter Day's Work, because the day's work, they have this term giornata, which is how much time they could get in a day, work that they could get done in a day when they were doing plaster, when they were doing fresco. So if you look at the Sistine Chapel ceiling very closely, there are all these little hairlines, and you see that Michelangelo would only do like this much in a day. You know, it would only do as much as it took for the plaster that they would put on a part, and then it would dry by the end of the day. And these women who worked in quilts had, you know, similar sort of terminology about how much work that they could get done in a day. And I don't know, it was very moving to me. And those quilts themselves are stunning as well, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Yes, that chapter was very moving for me too. So when did you decide to write a book about your experience? Could you talk a little bit about the process of getting the book together? And also, I guess maybe it goes together with when you knew it was the right time to leave the Met. Was it because the book was getting written, or you said you were ready to finally go beyond the stillness to what you call the hands-down work of living and struggling and growing and creating? Because you had talked about the stillness at the beginning of how important that was. So there's definitely a narrative arc in your book that I really appreciated. So let us know a little bit about your decision.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yes. As you mentioned, when I began, it was very much about stillness. I kind of felt a little shell shocked, and my favorite part of the job by far was the sort of ability to just be quiet and sort of, you know, I don't know, just become almost invisible in a great big place like that. But I think inevitably over the course of 10 years, particularly when you get older, I was just 25 when I started. I was 35 when I left, and I had a couple of kids. And, you know, life's a little different. And I think I was a little more interested by the end in the other part of life, which is not stillness, but rather kind of putting your head down, as you just mentioned, and sort of trying to get things done and sort of steer some of your choices in life. And I had gotten interested in the idea of writing a book. My first idea, years in, I don't know how many years in, 7 years in or something. My first idea, though, was to write a guard's guide to the Met. That was my first idea. Just sort of mix in anecdotes about people that I see and about guard stuff behind the scenes, and then mix that in with a little art history and kind of make this fun little mosaic. But I tried that, and it was just kind of a mess because, I don't know, there was no sort of center to it. So eventually I just had to come around to the idea, well, you know, the thing that could make this an interesting book maybe is if it had a story, and the story would have to be my story. And, oh, geez, this is probably going to have to be a memoir. And in order to be a memoir, I'm going to have to write about my brother, and I'm going to have to teach myself kind of how to do this, how to write it a little more novelistically too. So I think when I was just screwing around trying to write about things, it was a little more like essays, or, a little more in my head. Whereas to write a memoir, you kind of have to blow it out. You got to, think in terms like a novelist would, in terms of scenes and settings and characters and things. So it took me years to figure out how to do that, really. And I was just sort of just scribbling in circles. And then it did, I don't write about this in the book because you don't want to write about writing a book in a book, but it did affect it did affect when I left, I'm sure. I think I would have left eventually, but I did leave with the notion that I was going to try really damn hard to make this happen as well. So I got a part-time job while I was finishing my book proposal, just as a tour guide around New York City, and then it worked.
Wow, beautifully, as far as I'm
Oh,
concerned. Is there, just before we leave the net, is there anything else that we didn't discuss that you'd like people to know, either about museum or being a guard or looking at the art?
no, I don't think so. I'm sure I can address anything if you guys have questions in the Q&A.
I was lucky enough to see your play, as Carolyn was too, last summer. So you adapted it from your book, so you really became a playwright in order to do that. Tell us about how the play came about and your experience with it.
Sure. Yeah, that happened with I did the Charleston Literary Festival in South Carolina, and it's a wonderful festival, and it was in a big theater, the Dock Street Theater, and it just was like an electric crowd. It was like the best event I'd ever done. And then I met while I was there that the guy that Carolyn mentioned, Dominic Dromgoole, who is British director. He used to run the Globe, and we sort of just hit it off. I love Shakespeare. My mom's a theater actor. That was her career in Chicago. So I had this idea because I had done all these talks at this point, and I thought, well, you could turn a talk into a one-man play and sort of up the ante of this thing, because there's something that is fitting about a one-man play about a sort of lonesome security guard. And you could do something cool with projections to make the art, and it just would have a little more poetry than a talk would. And also that a theater is kind of like a museum in some ways. Like you can kind of quiet people down in a theater in a sort of similar opening up kind of a way as you can in a museum. And I thought, well, I could even play with that. And the way that theater does, you don't have to pretend that you're literally in the Met. You could sort of address the audience and bring them in on this idea of what you're up to. So I had that idea, and I pitched it to Charleston and to Dominic, and they went in for it. And it's kind of crazy. From the time I had the half-baked idea to the time we did the off-Broadway run was a year, less than a year. So I worked with Dominic. He read drafts, but I wrote the play, and then it took me forever to memorize it. It's so hard to memorize a 90-minute play, my God. And then we premiered it in Charleston in the last fall, and then we did it 65 shows on Union Square in the spring. And it looks like it's going to tour. They're probably going to hire somebody else to be me, which is great for me because I can't tour endlessly with the thing. I've got kids and I need to be writing. But that's where it stands.
Well, you make it sound almost easy, but I'm sure it wasn't.
It was great fun.
Yeah, it was very entertaining too. So just the last question is, what's next for you? You said the play is going to be touring. Any other books in the works?
Yeah, I'm just finishing up. I'm not ready to completely share, but I'm writing another book. I'm just finishing up a proposal about seeing again, about how to see art and how to look at art, but not as an end in itself, but rather to help us see this strange and beautiful world that we're a part of, and sort of take seriously the idea that, you know, the artists themselves, they were looking out at the world, and then they sort of transpose it to us or push it over to us through these artworks. But we, through the act of seeing this art, can help our collaborators in creating the beauty of the work. And then God knows we're collaborators in creating the beauty in the world when we go out and see the thing. So I'm writing a book about that. And I think I sort of have the angle down, but that's the trickiest thing. The trickiest thing is figuring out kind of, you know, you can't just spew out all your ideas. You gotta, so I think I got it. We'll see. But yeah, that's what I'm working on. And then I give private tours of the Met now and again. And I do a good amount of talks at museums and stuff. If anyone has hookups with, you know, they're on the board of some museum or something, I'm all ears because I love doing that. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick. Just before I turn it over for questions, I just wanted to read on your about your last page. You're standing at the top of the great staircase, and you kind of talk about what advice you would give to a visitor. And I just think the last sentence or two was just beautiful. So you say, look at artworks with wide, patient, receptive eyes, and give yourself time to discover their details as well as their overall presence, their wholeness. Hopefully, in the silence and the stillness, you'll experience something uncommon or unexpected and venture back into the world carrying something with you, something that changes you a little bit.
Well, thank you very much.
So now we'll turn over to our audience. We already have a number of questions. Wow. Catherine Henson asked, what was your favorite gallery?
Ooh, so my home section in my early days was the old master wing. That's where I was about half my days. And I think that generally that section is kind of the thing that still makes my heart kind of sing the most. I liked being posted all over the place though. So, you know, on a certain day, you know, how can you beat the Temple of Dender? And then on a certain day, you love being sort of squirreled away someplace more obscure, you know, the Moroccan court in the Islamic wing or something. But those are a few.
Okay. Carol Sterling asked, do security guards receive specific information or training about the artists and or the artwork in the rooms they are assigned to?
No, one of the reasons why I think they have the assigned home section is that you know, you become pretty knowledgeable in that area, but you pick up your knowledge just by reading the labels, overhearing the docents, talking to people. I would do a lot of reading too. And then one thing we do have though is when the special exhibition rolls in, the curator will tend to give a lecture, and they'll do one lecture that's before the museum opens, right before we get on post at 9 a.m. Or I think at 9:30 these days they do it, but before, so the guards can attend. So a lot of us get some info about the special exhibits that way.
Rosalie Zuckerman asks, when you were working as a security guard, did you visit the Met on your days off?
Well, I would come. So it used to be the Bet's closed Wednesdays now. It was closed Monday in my day, and you could bring people on Monday. And of course, you're a star when you get to bring people in the closed museum, because it's very cool on a Monday. Because you know, you see the art handlers working and the riggers who are moving big things with the ropes and them changing out the lamps, and it's a little kind of some areas are a little hive of activity, and then of course just the magic of being completely alone with, you know, whatever suits your fancy, the Congolese power figures or whatever. So I would do that, but otherwise no. Although I, you know, I would go to other museums.
Irene Sachs asks, which is a question I was going to ask too, how did you deal with boredom, with the passage of time? I love the fact that you don't accomplish anything during a shift.
Yes. So, you know, time, you could talk infinitely about it because I had a lot of time to think about it. And one thing about time is that there really is something liberating about having so much of it that you cannot possibly kill it and you cannot possibly fill it up. Because I think that, you know, if you're standing in line at the post office and you can see the end of the line, it just drives you insane. You're like, oh. But if you're standing on post and there's a 12-hour day, it's like being out on an open ocean and you cannot see the end of the day and you cannot fill up this time. And you have to, by necessity, just learn to accept that, accept it in the you know, sense of stomach it, but also accept it, welcome it, you know, luxuriate in it, that you have all of this time, and slow your mind down and learn how to think in your head in sentences and paragraphs, and learn how to spend time looking around at this person and that person and that person and that person, and looking at that art and that art and that art, and learning how to appreciate what's around you, um, and doing all different kinds of things with your mind. I mean, I think that to the extent that I ended up being able to write a book about art, it's entirely due to the fact that I had the time to figure out what I think about any of this, you know? I think if I was not a guard, I would have very conventional opinions about art because I wouldn't have given it much thought. And I would just sort of, I don't know, I would probably, if I wrote about art, I would sound like anybody who writes about art. But I think I write a little strangely about art because I had enough time to get strange. And I think, you know, that sort of, I don't know, I miss it. I miss it in my life right now. Like writing this new book will be a challenge because I don't have years to just sort of stand around and idly think about what this new book could be. But I have to tap a part of myself that is that old part, that welcomes the boredom, because the boredom can become something other than boredom.
Sounds like a wonderful form of mindfulness in a sense, you know. In talking about that, the time spent in the gallery, Susan Freeman asks, did you have a certain amount of time? How long did you stay in each gallery during the day? Did you rotate through?
Yes. Yeah. So the way it works, you're on a rotation with 3 other guards, and there's 1 relief guard, and then there are 3 posts that you rotate among, and you are always cycling each other off, you know, one to the other to break, one to the other. And your post would usually cover, depending on where you were, if you were in a big gallery, you might only have that 1 gallery, but you might be covering 2 or 3 galleries. And then you'd be there 30 minutes, then the next one 30, then the next one 30, with variations. Like when it's lunch hour, you'll get 45-minute long posts rather than 30-minute long posts because people are taking a longer lunch. But generally, you're sort of cycling through every 90 minutes through kind of 3 posts, and then you're on break for 30 minutes.
So I guess over the 10 years, you got a chance to have a post in every gallery in the Met?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I would say every gallery, you know, dozens of times. Yeah.
Howard Levy asks, can you talk more about your play? Its content, format. Well, you talked a little bit about how you came to
Sure.
write.
Yeah, so it's an adaptation of the book, but of course it's much different than the book because you know, I took seriously the idea that this has got to be a play. And you know, when you write just an 80 or 90-minute play, it has to have kind of one thrust in a way that a book doesn't have, because a book has chapters and you pick it up and you put it down, you pick it up and put it down. Whereas a play, the audience is in your hand and you've got to take them through something for 80 or 90 minutes. So I tried to do some similar things to the book in that it's a mix of kind of the high and the low, and that there are areas where I'm waxing on about art, and then other areas where we're laughing about the fact that my feet hurt. And then, you know, zigging over to pretending that we're in my brother's hospital room, but doing that in an imaginative way suggested by, you know, a lamentation painting or something like that. Theater is such a wonderful medium because it's just so flexible. You can do whatever, you know, as long as it has a certain lyricism behind it, the audience will roll along with you. So I tried to write something that I didn't really have any other model. I just wrote something that just felt coherent to me. and then took Dominic's, notes to heart, and then just refined the thing over, mumbling, walking around Brooklyn, mumbling it to myself 80 billion times, memorizing it. And yeah, it's me. I'm wearing a blue suit and a clip-on tie, and there are, Dominic did the set direction, and it's beautiful. There's the set design, rather. There are these 3 sort of hovering frames that can have all different projections and 3 different benches. And it's like we're at the Met, sort of, but also it's, kind of the magical, flexible theater space.
I like the way actually you broke the fourth wall. It became interactive at times.
Yeah.
I was sitting on an aisle and I got to ask a question.
Oh, did
Where
you? Oh,
are
wonderful.
yours?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Yes, yes. I mean, that's the thing. They say one of the old pieces of advice about a one-man play is that the audience is the other member, or, other character. And that, yeah, I think there's truth to that for sure.
Jonathan Gelman asked, did you keep a diary during the 10 years, during the whole time?
Yeah, I always scribbled in little notebooks. I would always have a little, like, reporter's notebook in my, shirt pocket, and just scribble a little note here and there, and then scribble more on my breaks or more on the subway home. And I kept all those. And I typed up, I went through them and found the good stuff and typed it all up into sort of, a big categorized sort of system. So it was wonderful when it came time to write the book, that I could refer to, my thoughts, previous thoughts. I wasn't real good about, it's not like I recorded on this day I saw this guy, but you can fudge all that when you're writing a memoir. It's a little more impressionistic. You don't have to say, it's not like you're a reporter. But yeah, I to this day, I write mostly in longhand, and I think it's because I more or less trained myself to write longhand.
Just as you said, you don't experience the Met Museum in a linear fashion. Your book wasn't linear either. As you said, it was impressionistic. You went back and forth in time, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I originally wrote, the first, it didn't even, I even hesitate to call it a draft. But when I originally wrote the sort of first version of it, it was just linear. But one of the things that my editor at Simon & Schuster said, he's like, well, we need to start in the Met. And I at first, usually when your editor tells something, your first instinct is to think like, oh, no, he doesn't understand. Like I have this architecture. But of course he was right. Like you can't begin with your brother, you and your brother growing up together. Like who cares? You begin in the Met, and you can cut back to that stuff. And people then will understand that it's resonant. So when I mentioned that I had to teach myself how to do all these kind of novelistic things, that's the kind of thing I mean. And my agent and editor were both of great help. Although the thing with those people is they never tell you how to do it; they just tell you to do it. So you still have to go out, and their job is fun because they just say, "Go make this better," and you got to go do it.
Robin Beagleson asks, if you could make one change to the Met, what would improve the experience for visitors? What would it be? That's interesting.
Oh, that's an interesting question. One thing I'll say is I think that the Met and all museums could do a much better job at letting people in on the secret of how this stuff is made, how this art is made. And I think that anytime we give people a window onto that, they're fascinated. Because I think that all of us, one of our faults is that we assume that other people know the same things that we know. And curators are so guilty of that. And they think that people know how bronze is cast and how stone is carved, and even the fact that all that marble statues in the American Wing wasn't carved by the artists themselves. The artists made one out of clay, and then they modeled it up, and some guy in the Bronx was chipping this thing away. And how old masters made their art, and how there's all these different layers, and there's an underdrawing and these slow drying semi-transparent glazes. And the reason I say that I think that is important is not only that it's neat for people to see that, but that it's relatable to them it's such a good entryway for them, because whether or not you care about you know, 17th century Christian iconography or whatever else, you know what it is to make something well. You know what that is. And you admire it, and you admire it in yourself the way that you admire it in somebody else. And it puts it on a human level that this is a thing that was made by a human hands. Um, and I think there's a number of things the Met could do to do a better job at that.
That's interesting. Thanks. Charles Shroof says, unknown to the public, many guards are very talented. They're writers, actors, opera singers, artists themselves. Did you meet those kinds of guards during your time?
Oh yes, 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 yes. Yeah. In fact, so one thing you guys should do sometime is the Met does what's called the Employee Art Show. Every other year they do it, and it used to be just closed to the public, but now it's open to the public. They've had two of them that are open to the public, and it's extraordinary because it's just this Daniel Kershaw, who's the chief designer at the Met. It's really his baby, and he puts as much attention into this thing as he did the Sienna show that just closed. And it's beautiful, and it's such a huge range of work, from photography to watercolor to crazy installation displays and videos of people's weird performance art, and someone who's a luthier who makes instruments, and a shoe designer, and it goes on and on. And it's not just the guards, but I would say probably the plurality at least are guards, because we're the plurality of employees there. But yes, there's extraordinary talented people, notably ones like Emily Lamacus, um, who has gallery shows all the time, and like you said, also writers and poets and things. I just met with Mr. Abdullah, Chief Abdullah, at dinner with the other night, and he used to be a CUNY professor. He was a professor at City College and Cooper Union and FIT, because you know how it is. He was just adjunct, so he had to sort of piece the things together. But this is a guy who was a security officer and then a chief, and moonlit as a professor of Islamic art, from Iraq. Just the most erudite man you could ever want. Not only in Islamic art, but if you want to talk about Tolstoy or Raymond Chandler or French New Wave cinema, and I think the job attracts a certain kind of person like that, because they're interested in a job where they kind of don't get pushed around, and they can kind of think their own thoughts all day. But just also, it's just New York. There's just a lot of characters that have all sorts of backgrounds anywhere you look.
And then there was that wonderful story of the guard
Yes.
in the who was a visitor came, supposed visitor came to look for a certain art object, and the guard started to talk to the visitor, who turned out to be the curator of the Out of Egypt show. And this guard was a sculptor. He had been a sculptor in Egypt, right? And one of his sculptures ended up in the exhibit, which was really.
That's right. Yes, he's still there. Yeah, Mr. Khalil, he's the nicest guy ever. He's an Egyptian guy. He's got a beautiful studio in Jersey City. He makes these incredible wooden sculptures. He was making them in Egypt. He showed up in the United States with hardly anything, hardly like no money in his pocket, but his sculpting tools. There's a decent amount of Egyptian guards at the Met, so he probably knew somebody. I don't really know how that worked out. But yes, his beautiful sculpture was in that special exhibit, and he would be posted right next to it.
Yeah, it sounded like pure chance that the visitor, who turned out to be the curator, just happened to ask this particular guard, where this object he was looking for.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought that was a really beautiful story. Were there Carol Groneman asked, were there galleries or exhibitions that you didn't like being posted for?
I mean, of course, I can't say there weren't. I mean, I won't call anything out. It's rare that something would like bother me. It more often would be that you just give something a full chance, which as a guard, I had the ability to do. You know, you'd be posted in this special exhibition 15 times. You spend 100 hours in it. You're like, I gave this my full chance. Nothing, nothing. You know, it just, it doesn't, it, which is in itself interesting. You know, you sort of learn something from that. I think that in some ways, your own response to art is somewhat like your own response to comedy, which is that you know whether you think it's funny because you laugh. If in comedy, you know, if you laugh, then it's funny. You know, that sort of answers the question for you. And I really do think that if you spend long enough time with art, you begin to learn what your response to beauty is. And it's a physical sort of upwelling. And it's a little bit subtle. So you do have to sort of learn how to create some space in yourself to sort of feel what it is when it bubbles up. But it is fun when you get to the point where you can say, well, you know what? I don't think this is beautiful. And I know that for a fact because the thing that happens when I find something beautiful didn't happen. And I tried. And sometimes that will be true of, you know, something minor artist or contemporary artist or something. But it might be true for you of, you know, a Cezanne or something. Could be. And it's an interesting thing to learn. So of course I had things that'll left me flat, but you know, I don't worry about writing about those things. I just write about stuff I like.
Well, Susan Rauch asks, did your feet hurt?
Yeah, although for me, you know, it's funny. Everyone has a different response, uh, and for me, it's not my feet; it's my legs. And to this day, I don't know this for sure, but I think it messed up my legs because I have to foam roll every night. Where is it? Somewhere around here. I have to foam roll my legs, and I'm constantly, you know, having to sit and stretch. My legs are giving me all sorts of problems. Other people, it's their shoulders, you know, the somehow or their back. But I was very lucky that I was young. You know, some of the older guards, you know, that's no joke. It's no joke having to stand as much as they do. And for some people, it causes health problems and knee problems and all sorts of things. So I don't know. I don't quite know why we do it this way in America. If you go to Europe, everybody sits, all the guards are sitting. But they're also all watching soccer on their phones. So I think in America, I don't know, we've got sort of an ethic that the guards should be up and about and wandering, and there's some sense to it.
Peggy Blumenthal asks, some guards, I think you showed that you were one of those guards, seem eager to help kids understand what they were looking at. Are you encouraged to interact with the public or encouraged?
Yep. Yes. Well, first, I don't want to besmirch all the European guards. That was a joke. I only saw a couple watching soccer on their phones. But yeah, you know, at the Met, they do encourage. It's not that they encourage, like, hey, go talk to people. If you don't want to talk to people, you don't have to. But they don't discourage it. And I think that's smart because one of the things that, as a guard, makes you alive to the world is being alive to the world. If you're just glassy eyed, you know, in the corner, even if you're thinking your own thoughts, you're not alert to what's happening around you. So I would try to talk to people when I felt like it. It's funny, in some ways, my own mood would affect whether anyone talked to me. You know, if I showed up at work and I kind of felt like I wanted to be talked to, then I would have that gleam in my eye and people would come up and chew my ear off. And if I just was preoccupied by something, no one would talk to me all day long. And of course, I had days where all day long I was preoccupied or I just, you know, had a bit of a grumpy scowl on or whatever it is. So people didn't talk to me. But yeah, I always enjoyed it. You know, you learn, and it's also fun being this sort of you know, I love New York City. I've been here my whole adult life now, and I did feel privileged to be like the New York guy, even though I didn't grow up here, but the New York guy to these tourists who come in. And you have to realize that you're going to be very memorable to them. You know, they might have a story. They might not remember anything about the Met except their funny interaction with you. Because one of the things, if they're, you know, coming from France or something, one of the things they want to know is what New Yorkers are like. And if you go up to them and you're like, hey, buddy, come here, let me show you something. Let me show you something here. Then that is, it's a privilege to be able to impress that upon people.
We have time for a few more questions. Nancy Small asked, the New York Times, I don't know if you've seen that, they have this new challenge. They suggest that people look at paintings for 10 minutes. Each month they show a painting and they try to get you to look at it for 10 months. Do you have thoughts about that? How long it takes for you to really appreciate a painting? I know you did say at one point you need patience.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I appreciate what the Times is doing. I understand why they're doing it. I understand why it's helpful for people to do that at home, especially if they don't live in New York or whatever. But I never do their things because part of me finds it a little bizarre. Because the thing about paintings is seeing them in the flesh is the thing, you know? It just, for me, staring at a computer screen, looking at the Bruegel, that's just not the thing, you know? It doesn't breathe. It doesn't have this sort of materiality. It doesn't have, you can't see the little brush strokes. You don't have the light streaming in and mixing those pigments together, coming back and hitting your eyes. All of that is the full bodiedness of a painting that I really need. So my answer to that question is you need all the time in the world to look at it. I mean, because you're going to find when you look at it one day and then you go away and you learn something and you come back and you look at it the next day, it's going to look different. But ideally, you're going to want to start again by resetting and taking your time and sort of turning off your mind and giving it time to breathe and to sort of do its work on you. But yeah, this stuff, especially because that's just one aspect of it, the sort of the visual, sort of component of it. Also, to think through these paintings and what they're about and what their import is in you and your life, that takes infinite time too. So you can't get to the end of these things. It's like it's the same way that you can't get to the end of becoming a good artist. You can't get to the end of being good at looking at art. I mean, I'm way closer to the beginning than I am to the end. And I spent 10 years doing, more or less just that.
Yeah, that's good. Chris Lowry says, can you speak a little to the creative community of the Guards and how that support may have been helpful in deciding to write a book? And do you miss them? And maybe a quick description of closing of the dismissal. Chris Lowry, Section M, 1996 to 98.
Oh, cool. Well, hello. We didn't overlap, but we're kin. Yes. So yeah, the creative community of the Guards. Yes, you felt it's always good to be in a community where you feel like other people are interested in ideas and that they have their own thing. And what I loved about the creative community of the Guards too is that because people are working in all different media and they have all their own sort of thing, there's no pressure of conformity in any way, shape, or form. It's a very sort of live and let live culture. New York is a live and let live place. I'm a kind of live and let live kind of guy. So I like to feel alone in a crowd. And I kind of felt like alone in a crowd in the creative community in the Met too. I could be working on my little thing and I didn't have to show it to anybody just like that. But no, just knowing that everyone, not everyone, but some of us are all kind of in the coal mines is, I don't know, sort of exciting. So it's not that I got any sort of direct advice, but being in the atmosphere is very helpful. At closing, so it's a sort of, we're all spread throughout the whole museum, but we're pushing people toward just a couple exits. And so it just is a system of the sort of most far-flung guards pushing everyone in and in and in and in, and you making sure that this part's clear and that part's clear and that part's clear. And then the section, G guards push over to the section A guards, push over to there. And we all converge finally on the Great Hall. And if you're ever there at the very end of the day, you'll see, 300 guards or something in the Great Hall. And then we're all just chatting about the day or whatever else. And then a manager says, okay, good night. And then we all, off toward the locker room. And some guards are like halfway changed into their street clothes by the time they get to the locker because they got a bus to catch or whatever. Yeah, it's a sort of funny little ritual.
Yeah, quite a scene. So unfortunately, we only have maybe time for one last question. And a few people have asked about how you approach appreciation of art with your children. How
Oh, yeah.
you take
Yeah.
them to the museum, how do you
Yeah, so I'm at a cool age right now, and then my kids are 10 and 12. So they're really kind of, they're both impressionable, but also coming into themselves. And, they're not too cool to hang out with me, certainly, but they also, it's fun. New York City is really sort of unfolding in a way for us. In some ways, I think raising a kid in New York when they're real small, things are so difficult, taking the stroller on the train and stuff. And then you realize when at this age, you start to realize why you're doing that. And so I like to take them to things that are even a little above their head because that's what my mom did with me. Like I would see Shakespeare or whatever, and you would just roll along with it because kids are used to things being a little bit above their head, and they can kind of just roll along with things. My daughter loves dance, so we go to the ballet. My son's more of a soccer guy, so we go to the Mets more than we go to art. We got to beat the Marlins these next few days. Um, but when I take them to a museum, my main thing that I like to do is just take one kid. I find that if I take both of them, they sort of have their usual kind of energy, and I don't know if it's sibling rivalry or whatever, but they just kind of like they just take themselves their same self that they are out in the streets or whatever. Whereas if I take just one kid, they can really slow down in the way of a solitary person in a great museum can sometimes slow down, and I can get them to just direct me, like just what do you want to see? What's we got all the time in the world today. We're just going to be quiet and we're going to see this thing and we're going to go from one thing to another. And my daughter loves to draw and she loves the Percy Jackson stuff. So that's her favorite, the Greek and Roman art. My son, his thing used to be really Asian art, and that was really his thing. We live in Chinatown here in Brooklyn, so he's got Chinese friends and is interested in that. I don't know. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes not. The thing about kids is they have their own taste. You can't really mold it very much at all. I remember when I read them children's books, I was all, sure it was only going to be Maurice Sendak and only going to be the greatest stuff. And then they turn out, just adoring Dora the Explorer or whatever. And what are you going to do? That's you're going to end up reading those things a million times. But no, it's fun. It's fun being in this period of them kind of awakening to what this city is and what this world is.
Thanks, Patrick. Thank you all very much for coming today. I'm sorry I didn't get to all the questions. You provoked a lot of questions, Patrick, which is great.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
A special thanks to you for joining us for this inspiring conversation. I just would like to tell everybody about what our next Fridays at 1 program will be, and that will be on October 31st, Halloween. Our guest will be Maurice Samuels, who's the author of Alfred Dreyfus, The Man at the Center of the Affair, and he will share new insights into the famous Dreyfus Affair and its relevance to anti-Semitism today. He's a professor at Yale University, and Mr. Samuels will be interviewed by our LP Squared member, Mark Ratner, who coordinated last semester's The Dreyfus Affair Revisited study group. We hope you will join us then. Everybody, enjoy the weekend. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.